turn it on, there's a switch on the bottom.
Oh, you don't just press horizontal?
No,
Oh. That was so easy.
that would be much easier.
They don't have that. They just have this thing.
That's it.
We can pass it around. Oh, no. Hello.
No, no. It's different. I don't know that. What number is it? What's it say?
Can I stand up?
It might be a new one. I don't know. You can do whatever you want. So let me pass these out to you guys. Take one and pass. Take one and pass. Good evening. Shana Tova. A little strange to be saying that already, but here we are. It's wonderful to be together with all of you, and it's wonderful to share this evening with Rodef Shalom. We're thrilled to welcome all of you here. This evening, we are planning to have an open discussion and conversation about transgender rights in our community today and where things stand and where we see things headed. So let me do a really quick introduction of the panel, and then we'll each speak. Some of us have handouts, some of us have slides. All of us are open for questions or comments, so we hope you'll not be shy and push us and ask anything you'd like to ask. My name is Daniel Fellman. I'm the rabbi here at Temple Sinai, and I am thrilled to be able to share this evening with all of our friends and colleagues. To my left is Rabbi Sharon Henry. She is the rabbi of Rodef Shalom in her... She's been a rabbi for a long time.
35 years. 35 years.
In her 35th year as a rabbi.
In my 36th, yeah.
36th year.
I'm in my whatever. 1988. It was a long time ago.
To Rabbi Henry's left is Representative Abigail Salisbury, who is in her first term as a state representative of the 34th District and is a part of our Jewish community, and we're thrilled to welcome her here this evening. And to her left is Dr. Morgan Fader, who is a member here at Temple Sinai and is a neuropsychiatrist. Is that, yeah? And does things that I kind of wish I understood, but don't really. So let me begin with a couple of articles to share with all of you. If you want to. So there was a news item just this week that there was a proposal made in the Pittsburgh City Council. Anybody catch that little bit of news? To make Pittsburgh what's the word? A sanctuary city. I should know that word in this room. A sanctuary city for trans care and for LGBTQ care, so that regardless of what laws get passed in other communities or even in Harrisburg, God help us, the city of Pittsburgh would remain open and welcoming to all. And so this first article talks about that new proposal. This is very similar to legislation that the council passed some time ago about abortion care. Same concept of making Pittsburgh a sanctuary city for abortion care. And in fact, that has happened. There are significant numbers of people coming in from West Virginia and Ohio and elsewhere to get abortion care on a regular basis. So on the one hand, our city's trying to do the right thing, which is wonderful and good. On the other hand, that we have to pass legislation to make this happen says a little bit about the environment in which we live and the challenges we face. And so that opening article is just sort of an opening salvo to see sort of the lay of the land. Let me now pass around the bigger packet. Thank you, Cantor. Take one and pass it. You'll recognize these, Louise. So this packet has a couple of different articles. We'll walk through them together, looking at gender issues in Jewish texts and in Jewish tradition. Amazingly enough, in Talmud, Judaism has a comprehension of multiple genders. Now, that may seem a little surprising because Talmud is, give or take, a couple of thousand years old, and it's not exactly known for its liberal outlook. But within Talmud, there are sections that deal with gender questions, and there are, as you'll start to see, we've got more copies here, so if you need more, just say so. Yeah, the two who just walked in, the two late guys, they need them.
Love being called out of class.
Here, give them one of these too, Cancer. But you're here, and we're glad you're here. You can get the notes from what you missed from someone else. So we'll walk through some of this packet together, and some of it I'll leave for you to read on your own. This comes from an organization called Keshet, which does wonderful work. If you open to what it says, page 3 of 9 at the bottom, it says terms for gender diversity in Jewish sacred texts. And so these are the varying genders as Talmud understands them. First is Zachar. Zachar is derived from the word for a pointy sword and refers to a phallus. It is usually translated as male in English. And in modern Hebrew, Zachar is still the word that's used for male. Nekeva is derived from the word from a crevice and probably refers to a vaginal opening. It is usually translated as female in English, and in modern Hebrew, nekeva is, in fact, the term for female. Flip the page, and we get to androgynous. This word is not a Hebrew word in its origins. It's etymologically, it's a Greek word. A person who has both male and female sexual characteristics. In the Talmud, the androgynous is understood as someone who has both a penis and some female sex traits. There are 149 references in Mishnah and Talmud, 350 in classical Midrash and Jewish law codes. So this is a term that is used a lot. Now, the understanding in Talmud is not the same understanding of gender that we have today. They are very much speaking from a more physical comprehension of an individual as opposed to an emotional or spiritual or psychological kind of viewpoint. They're looking at the physicality and trying to effectively trying to compartmentalize and say, well, if this has this one, it goes in this box, and this one in that box. Talmud is ultimately trying to organize society and humanity and make order out of chaos. And so in this case, they're talking about how do we comprehend this physical set of circumstances versus that one. Then we have a tumtum. A tumtum is a person whose sexual characteristics are either indeterminate or obscured. In the Talmud, the tumtum has indeterminate genitals, 181 references in Mishnah and Talmud, 335 in Midrash and later Jewish codes. An Ilonit is a person who identifies as female at birth, but develops male characteristics at puberty and is infertile. 80 references in Mishnah and Talmud, 40 references in Midrash and later codes. And a saris is a person who's identified as male at birth, but develops female characteristics at puberty or later. A saris is considered a male, but has no penis or a very small penis. A saris can be naturally a saris, which is a saris chama, or become one through human intervention. That is to say, through an accident of some sort, where his physical body is crushed in a way to leave him without an intact organ. And that is called a saris adam. The status is also known as an Enoch. 156 references in Talmud, 379 in Midrash and Jewish law code. So we've got these variations of how we understand all of this. We actually spent a fair amount of time this last spring in a Talmud course working through a bunch of the permutations of all of this, which on some level actually was the origins of having this conversation this evening, and that we wanted to explore this further and bring this out of the classroom and into the sanctuary to make sure that this was a conversation that we were having writ large, that we wanted to make sure we were being as fully inclusive as we could. let me run through some texts here very quickly. First, the very beginning text comes from Genesis 1. V'yivareh Elohim et ha'adam b'tzalmo, b'tzelem Elohim barei oto, zachar v'nekeva barei otam. So zachar and nekeva show up here in this opening Torah text. God created the first human being, the Adam, in God's own image, b'tzelem Elohim. In the image of God, God created them. Male and female, God created them. Question is, how do we understand that? Did God create two separate entities, male and female, or one entity that is both male and female? And the text is not clear. The text leaves all sorts of opening for conversation here. And lots of comments about it, including like the one just below from Rabbi Yirmiyahu, from Rabbi Jeremiah ben Elazar, who said, when the Holy One, blessed be the Holy One, created the first human, God created that being an androgynous. So Rabbi Jeremiah is saying that first being was not of the typical one gender that you might have assumed it was. And that from the very beginning, we humans had both traits. And there are all sorts of explanations and all sorts of midrashim and wonderful ideas of how that may have functioned. By the time we get to Mishnah, if you turn the page, Rabbi Yossi says, androgynous is a creation of its own kind, and the sages could not decide if he was a man or a woman. But this is not the case for the tumtum, because sometimes the tumtum is a man, and sometimes the tumtum is a woman. So Rabbi Yossi is already trying to differentiate here and categorize and say, well, sometimes it's this, sometimes it's that. We're not sure how this all plays out. Then let's jump ahead to text 4. Our genderqueer ancestors, Abraham and Sarah. So if you go to the next page, it's actually page 7. At the top, you'll get the English translation. Wait, no.
Maybe 7 is backwards. 7 is on the other side.
7 must be on the other page.
Yeah, 7 is on the other side of 8.
Yeah, sorry about that. We'll come back to page 5. Go to page 7.
Go to the back of page 8.
So we're on page 7 now. And it says, Rabbi Isaac said, why were our ancestors, Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, infertile? Because the Holy One, blessed be, longs to hear the prayer of the righteous. Rabbi Isaac further stated, why is the prayer of the righteous compared to a pitchfork? As a pitchfork turns the sheaves of grain from one position to another, so does the prayer of the righteous turn the heart of the Holy One from the attributes of strict judgment to the attributes of compassion. But Rabbi Ami said, Abraham and Sarah were originally tumtums. For it is said, look to the rock you were hewn from, the hollow of the pit from which you were dug. And this is followed by the text, look to Abraham your father and to Sarah who bore you. And Rabbi Nachman said in the name of Rabba bar Abuha, our mother Sarah was an Ilonite. For it is said, Sarai was barren, she had no child. The verse says both was barren and had no child to tell us she didn't even have a womb. So the story that we all learned in Hebrew school was that Abraham and Sarah tried and had difficulty trying, and it wasn't until they were much older and advanced in age. So old, in fact, that when Sarah heard she was pregnant, her reaction was laughter, right? Along comes this text and says that's not the issue. The issue is that her gender is something different, and she's an Ilonite, and therefore it's a whole different conversation. Now imagine what our tradition might look like if we had embraced this teaching from the get-go rather than the classical one we all learned. We'd be in a very different place. I would argue maybe a better place, but nonetheless a very different conversation and theoretically a much more open conversation. So if we flip back a little bit, we get to the Mishnah. So on page 5, you get to these Mishnahs, the different legal pieces of how is the androgynous like a man and how like a woman, and you can go through all of that. And then the second article in this packet is written by one of my teachers, Charlotte van Robert, and she goes into great depth here on Jewish legal discourse on the questions of gender identity and how we understand this. Suffice to say, our tradition recognizes that there is more than just male and female. We don't quite arrive, at least where I would like to arrive, which is to say that there is a whole spectrum and a whole understanding that, of binary versus non-binary and a whole rainbow of possibilities. Our tradition doesn't quite get there, but it does open a door. And it does say that there is a possibility of looking through traditional eyes and seeing multiple genders. And for me, at the beginning of a year, that's how I want to start. I want to start with what's possible. I want to start with the idea that there is more expansive opportunity than I had realized before. And so as you'll hear from each of us as we go along, there are ways where this can become more expansive or it can contract more. And in many ways, we're counting on people like Abigail to make sure it doesn't contract too much. She, on some level, carries a little heavier burden than the rest of us. Sorry. But we're here for you, and we got your back. But it becomes a fascinating question for us as we open a new year. How embracing are we going to be? How are we going to embrace even this part of our tradition, which isn't as well known, but is so important in terms of how we include everyone in society? So let me turn it over to Rabbi Henry, and she has a handout as well. Do you want to use this mic? Or?
Oh, yeah. I do. Thank you.
And we thank Cantor Glasser for handing out the handouts.
What I went to school for.
This is why he came from Australia to America to become a cantor. Stay for the service. You'll be glad you did. He has a beautiful voice.
So I have a genderbread person. Some of you have seen the genderbread person. It's a teaching tool. Mostly, I imagine that some of you in this room have definitely seen the genderbread tool, genderbread person. But if you haven't seen it, like it's actually for. It's like a 101. It's a gender 101. So I want to just start by saying, can we get up here? Do you have more? I made 50. We have, so the one up here has one. Ah, good. All right, so I just want to start with why was it important for the rabbis to have categories of male and female? Why is it so important for them to understand if something was ambiguous, why, or if something was ambiguous, to make it into a category? Why was that important? Does anyone know why it was so important to them?
I'll take a guess.
Yeah, thank you.
I would say two things. There's a lot of dichotomy in Judaism. Like I remember you gave a lovely sermon once on when you can tell the color of a thread in the day, so you can see what color, and you can tell whether it's like sunset or it's happened yet. So there's a has something happened or has something not happened kind of a thing. So there's an inherent binary. I feel like, is it Shabbat? Is it not Shabbat? Is
All
it
the
kosher? Is it
time.
not? Yeah.
All the time there's that inherent binary.
Yeah, so I think that there's an inherent binary in trying to figure things out, but also in a religion where you have obligations that are imposed on people based on their,
Something.
I guess, assigned, whether you want to say gender, I guess they would have said sex, or, I'm not sure what the right Hebrew word is, then you need to know where they fall in order to, in some ways, police their behavior.
So exactly, that was the answer I was looking for.
Oh, I get an A+.
So it's important because there are some things that in Jewish tradition that men are obligated to do, and there's like 3 things that women are obligated to do. Lots and lots of things that men are obligated to do. There's 3 things that women are obligated to do. Anyone know what they are? Candles. I'll give you one. Candles. You give me what? Challah. Nice. And this is a harder one. Family purity, laws, knowing when to go to the mikvah, when you have to go, right? So, okay. So those are the three things that women are obligated to do, but I don't want to really get into that. But I just wanted to just say that there was important for them to be able to, for not only for them to be able to tell people what to do, but so that you yourself would know what to do, right? So there needed to be some distinctions. So in the genderbread person, this is a construction that is important for lots of ways. I think the first reason this is important is because it shows that there's way more than one spectrum. So we oftentimes will talk about spectrum, a gender spectrum, but in reality, there's more than one spectrum. And I meant to look it up, but I think it's spectra, right? Plural? Spectra? Thank you. All right. So there are actually here 5 different spectra, and that's actually a really important a really important point that I want to make, that everybody knows that we're not just talking about one thing. It's broken down into many things. And so this tool talks about different characteristics or different qualities. So an identity is how we in our heads think of ourselves. How do we see ourselves? How do we identify based on what we understand gender to be? And really, to understand gender as a social construct, it's different in different societies, right? I think it looks different in different places, but for here, how do we identify in this culture, in this society, how do we see ourselves? That's identity. So if you go down to the first one in a blue, where it says gender identity, see that spectrum there? So that on the one side is null, so that's like absolutely 0 womanness to 10 on the womanness scale. Everyone see where I am? And then underneath that, manness. So those are identities. That's how we see ourselves. Okay, so then gender expression. So go to the armpit there. Expression is how a person presents themselves through action, clothing, demeanor, whatever. Again, those are going to change in different cultures, but how do we express? And one of the things I think it's really important is when we're talking about gender expression, it's just, if you feel like you need to know, if it matters to you what gender a person is, read what they're telling you, right? Because most people will express how they want you to see them. And so it's important to not miss those clues, right? So if it's important for you to identify, we could talk about for hours about why it's so important for us to identify people's genders. I don't know that we need to, but some people think they do. So gender, I mean, you do it, what I'm saying is for me to be able to identify your gender and for you to be able to identify mine. I'm not sure that's so important. Okay. All right, but that's in the armpit. So if you go to the middle in the yellow, the null would be 0 femininity and 0 masculinity, all the way to 100% or whatever it is, 10 out of 10 femininity and masculinity. Okay, the next one would be anatomical sex, which is our physical traits, our sex characteristics, as we call them when we learn about them in 8th grade or 7th grade or whatever it is, our secondary sex characteristics. And that is, I think, where the Talmud was sort of focused in on. They understood that it wasn't always 100% clear, and they're trying to make some sense of that. And they didn't really understand all these other constructs, so they were like zeroed in on this anatomical sex category. So this one, this is where the sort of unclear genitalia, or it's not 100% identifiable, or maybe it changes, or over a course of a person's life. That's what this one is. So it's like 0 to whatever femaleness and 0 to whatever maleness. And those are underneath it gives some things that we might consider in the common anatomical sex things, common gender expression things, and common identity things. Now, this is really important for those of us who are doing this as a 101. If you're doing this as like a 401, you already know this, but I think it's really important that we say that identity is not the same thing as expression, which is not the same thing as sex. So these little pictures and these little spectra, they help us understand that they're all different and then they could be at different points, right? So it's not, it's everyone following me? Like you could be at one point in the middle of a line on one of these spectra, and you could be at another, totally a different place at another one. Everyone understanding me? Okay. The little box there, sex assigned at birth, that one is like, that someone did that for us. And then at the bottom, it's very important to understand that gender and sexual orientation are not the same thing. And this piece even goes as far as making a distinction between who we're sexually attracted to and who we're romantically attracted to. And those things can change also. There's a spectrum for those. So when you put all of this stuff together, that's how we get gender. Anyone have any questions? Yeah.
Labeling and having different terms for people. Sorry. I think sometimes that we have gone too far in the other direction, that we have so many labels that it's overwhelming and confusing to everybody. And I mean no disrespect in this comment, but you know, if you are being discriminated against because of your sexual orientation and related things, or, you know, on the recipient end of violence because of any of those things, and again, this is not to be flip, in that moment, none of this matters. Because somebody isn't denying care or denying access or acting out because it's one type of alternate gender versus another. I think it's just a general response.
All right, so I think we're going to talk a little bit about what happens when we have experienced violations or discrimination. But for this purposes, I just really wanted everyone to understand like what we're talking about. Like I just wanted to sort of put the terms out there so everybody understands. And as I said before, I don't think we all understand that there's more than one spectrum. I think a lot of us have this sense of male on one side and female on the other side, and someone's going to fall somewhere in there, and that's just not how it works. And all of everyone, whether we identify as cisgender, I identify as cisgender, I was identified as my sex was identified as female, I identify as female, I look pretty much, I dress and act, I express myself female, I think, pretty much. So I would be a cisgender person or someone who's not a cisgender person. I don't know what the opposite is or what the other side is. I don't like, but so I wasn't really getting into like any of the things you're talking about in terms of discrimination. And I also don't think that on some level I don't feel like I get to say as a cisgender person. I don't think I have a lot to say about it as much as I have an obligation to learn as much as I possibly can and to educate as much as I possibly can. Other thoughts or questions? Okay. Yeah,
Am I up?
yeah, you're up.
Okay. So I was, hi, my name is Abigail Salisbury. I'm the state representative for District 34. So I am adjoining Representative Frankel's district, so we split the Fern Hollow Bridge in half. You might think it's across the middle, but you'd be wrong. He has 2 lanes and I have 2 lanes. So I live over in Swissvale. My husband and I used to be a member of the synagogue. I'm the only Jewish woman in the PA House. I'm a member of the Jewish Legislative Caucus. We only have 8 people in the legislature who are Jewish in the entire state. So out of 203 people in the Pennsylvania House, we have 7 Jews. So we don't really have a huge presence in state government, although our governor, of course, is Jewish, Governor Shapiro. So I am on the LGBT caucus as well. I'm the first person to identify as a member of the LGBT community who is sitting in my seat in district, not literally the seat, but in District 34. And so I was asked to talk a little bit about what is going on at a a political level or a legislative level in terms of these types of issues, gender, gender identity, people having gender affirming care, that sort of thing. Is that fair to say? Okay. So essentially the biggest thing that has happened recently is after, I believe, 22 years of being run every single year by Representative Frankel, the Fairness Act actually finally passed in the Pennsylvania House. So that's HB 300, if you've heard anything about that. So the reason that it passed this year, I don't know everybody's politics. I happen to be a Democrat. My district is 85% Democrat. But the reason it passed essentially is because the Democrats are in the majority currently. There's a one-seat majority in the Pennsylvania House that is a Democratic majority. So the Speaker of the House is a Democrat. The leadership gets to determine which bills run. So if we had a Republican leadership, which we have had for the past 12 years, then they would be determining which legislation made it out of committee and actually made it to a vote on the floor, because if you've watched that How a Bill Becomes a Law cartoon, not everything gets actually voted on. But the Pennsylvania Senate is a Republican Senate, so we've passed a lot of legislation through the House that has, I'll just be very frank with you, literally no chance of ever passing through the Senate. So it would then have to be signed by the governor. So it's not going to pass, go, or collect $200. It's not going to happen because it's just not going to get run in the Senate. So we've passed a lot of things like the Fairness Act. So what is the Fairness Act? There is a thing called the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. I'm an attorney. I've practiced in front of the HRC before. Essentially, if you have been discriminated against for some reason, perhaps because of your gender identity or some other characteristic about you, could be race, could be religion, then you have the ability to contact the PAHRC and bring a complaint. They can investigate that for you. Of course, you always, depending on the circumstances, have the option of hiring your own counsel, but not everyone has the ability to do that. You might not find people who want to take your case. So you have the ability to go to the HRC. There are also some communities, my borough, Swissvale Borough, where I was on council for 5 years. One of the last things we did before I left council was pass a Human Relations Commission piece of legislation for Swissvale. So there's actually an HRC for Swissvale itself. Yeah, there you go. So, but yeah, it's one of those things where I guess like a zoning board, it gets called upon as needed. So I don't think we've actually had anybody file a complaint yet, or have we? We haven't had the first meeting. Okay, I'm not on council anymore, so I'm not. I have 13 communities and not just the one anymore. So. But yeah, so that's an option under Pennsylvania law that you can create one for your community. So in my district, I have 12 different boroughs plus a section of the city of Pittsburgh. In those boroughs, well, I have 11 boroughs, 1 township. It is permitted under Pennsylvania law to create your own. However, my smallest community only has 450 people. My largest borough is Wilkinsburg and has about 14,000 people. So compared to, for instance, the size of the city of Pittsburgh, the frequency of use, I would say, in some of these communities might make it less likely for them to have it created. And of course, people could always go to the state PAHRC if they wanted. So under the Fairness Act, that system has been broadened. And again, it's important to note this has not passed the Senate. It has not been signed by the governor. And so under HB 300, however, it would be expanded to include things like gender identity and so forth. There was a lot of misinformation that went out about this piece of legislation where it was going to force doctors to perform gender reassignment surgery on children, that doctors would be forced against their will to perform phalloplasties or any number of surgeries on people or even on minor children. That's nowhere in this legislation. One thing that I can tell you that is uniform across the board is whenever we run legislation on this and any of these issues, there will be misinformation that goes out about it. So I got many hate-filled calls to my office in Harrisburg, to my district office, to my law office about from people who are very misinformed and who are livid about that legislation. So I'd say that's probably the biggest thing that we've done recently. Representative Frankel has also a hate crimes package, or package of hate crimes bills. There's also a tremendous amount of misinformation that's going out about that. I get emails all the time. My son is going to be imprisoned for wearing a cross to public school. No, that's not a thing. I used to teach First Amendment law at Pitt, so I like to think I have at least a tenuous grasp on the issue. And that's not a thing that we're going to make happen. So it's essentially taking things that are already crimes. It's already a crime to walk up to someone and punch them in the face, okay? That's not a thing you're supposed to do. But it sort of raises the severity level of that crime if it is done for a discriminatory purpose. So if you do it because the person's a Jew, if you do it because they're black, that sort of reason. So it doesn't outlaw Christianity in schools. It doesn't do any of the things that people are saying that it does for the most part. We also have some legislation coming up to make it easier for people to change their names. So sometimes when people you can change your birth certificate in the state of Pennsylvania to realign with the gender that you identify with. And so many people choose to also change their names. It's been traditionally a little bit challenging due to the publication requirement. That's going to change if that legislation goes through. So those are, I think, some of the big pieces of legislation that I can think of off the top of my head. Conversion therapy ban. If you don't know what conversion therapy is, it's a discredited by, from what you would know this better than I do, but discredited from what I understand by the medical establishment belief that you can coach someone to like not be gay anymore. Or not be transgender or whatever. It's the pray the gay away, if you will, kind of camps that you may have seen information on people sending their kids to that. So it would essentially make it illegal to operate that type of a facility in the state of Pennsylvania. So those are the big things I can think of. Is that useful? Yeah, does anybody have any questions on things? They have, I believe, a 5-seat majority. So the question was, how big of a majority do the Republicans have in the state Senate? And I believe it's 5 seats. Don't give up hope. I saw a hand back there.
Thank you. I believe it was Kansas that just passed legislation that you no longer have to match the sex assigned on your birth certificate to a license when you applied for a license. Do you need to do that in Pennsylvania?
So that's a question that I've had people come to my office about recently, actually. So I sometimes have people from other representatives' districts come to my office because I've identified myself as a member of the LGBT community, so they come to me. It's not that their own rep maybe doesn't care, it's just that they may feel more comfortable coming. So I've had a bunch of people come, and I've only been in office for 6 months, by the way. So I've had a bunch of people come to my office asking if they could be non-binary, for instance, on their driver's license. The answer is no in Pennsylvania. It is that binary, so you only have male or female, that's all we offer. And currently, my understanding is it is supposed to match your birth certificate. So I think you actually have to show PennDOT your birth certificate, because I had someone in the other day. We have constituent services folks in our district offices, mine is down in Braddock. And so this person brought in their they actually got their birth certificate through my office. They were able to apply for and receive a new one that had a different gender from what they were assigned at birth. And so they would be able to get that on their license as well, but those are the only 2 options we offer, and I believe it is supposed to match.
You can also have a letter from a physician testifying to your gender. That works too. It doesn't necessarily need to be on your birth certificate, because if you're not from Pennsylvania, there are a lot of states that won't let you actually change the gender on the birth certificate, so there are other ways to do it.
Yeah, if you were born in Pennsylvania, we can get you a new free one. But if you were born elsewhere, you got to go to Like I was born in Ohio, so I'd have to reach out to Ohio. I'm not shocked that you can't do that in Ohio.
I was also born in Ohio, so.
Paisan. Any other questions? No?
Okay, I guess it's me then. I have some slides which are going to get projected somewhere. Because I guess I'm an academic and I can't do anything without a PowerPoint presentation. Oh, they're there. Okay, cool. Oh, I can even see them up there. Great. Okay, you can skip that because people already know who I am. But I guess I'll introduce myself again. I'm Morgan Fader. I'm a neuropsychiatrist at UPMC, which is completely irrelevant to this. I'm also identified often as that queer guy who gets to serve on all kinds of diversity committees and got assigned to do a lot of LGBTQ plus healthcare education. So we can move away from my title slide because it's embarrassing me. But I'm going to talk a little bit about why this matters. We're talking about trans rights, right? And, you can look around the US and it's like things are actually pretty good here generally. People can be mostly who they want to be. Does it really matter that people don't have the same exact rights as everybody else? I mean, it's better than it was 10 years ago, right? But actually it does matter. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what we call minority stress theory. And I won't get real technical, I promise. But basically what you have is we all live in an environment, right? We live in all the stuff going on around us. It includes sort of like the laws that govern our society, the media that we view, all of that matters. Everybody has general stressors. Everybody worries about paying their rent, their mortgage. They worry about whether they're going to keep their job, find a job. They worry about their car being broken down, flat tires, whatever it happens to be. And so all of those things affect everybody. But people who are members of minoritized groups, and we can hit there we go, have what we call a minoritized status. And when I say minoritized groups, I mean people who are members, say, of the LGBTQ plus community, people who are racial minorities, people maybe immigrants, people who have some kind of status that is other in society, right, identifiably other. When people have that minoritized status, there are other things that apply, right? And so there are general stressors, and then we can hit the next. And we also have other stressors that apply to people, things like experiences. I don't know, can people read that? I can't read it, but I know what it says because I've done it before. Right, so experiences of prejudice or discrimination or violence that people are subjected to because of how they're identified by other people in society. And then you also, on the other hand, and we hit the button again, there we go, have what we call minoritized identity. So that's somebody's internal experience, kind of like when we're talking about somebody's internal experience of gender, identifying as trans or as queer or whatever it happens to be. And then there's a whole other group of stressors that come from that, and we can hit the button. And those are stressors that have to do actually a lot with those other stressors, like the discrimination, prejudice, and violence, because it's going to be somebody's experiences based on that, right? People may come to expect being rejected. They may expect violence. They may have sort of internalized senses that they are less than or other because of society's view of them. And all of these things, actually, we're going to have one more thing, so hit the button again. We're going to have resilience factors, which are good, right? These are things that help everybody cope with all the stuff that's going on every day. All of that stuff goes together, and now we hit it again, to have health outcomes, okay? So all this stuff mixes together, and that is a general overview of how we might see that somebody's being a member of the trans community will actually affect how their health is, right? And so this is, we're gonna take all of that stress, right? And basically all of that non-equality, not equal rights, and it's gonna come into health outcomes. And now you can hit the button again. Okay, so what is that, right? So this is data I pulled as of, actually it's last month now, August 11th of this year. And you can see basically the number of anti-LGBTQ plus bills that have been introduced across the country by state, right? And most of these are, sorry? Introduced, yeah, okay. And this is important actually because you hear about it in the news, right? You hear, oh, so-and-so is introducing this. In this place, they're trying to do X, Y, and Z, right? So this is sort of the milieu that we live in. You can, so most of these are either targeting trans children's right to participate in sports at school, targeting families of trans children's right to get gender-affirming care for their child. And then some of them are also targeting adults, but most of them target children. But some of them are like the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida, right, which actually did pass, although I think that might have been last year, where you can't talk about being a member of the LGBTQ plus community or even acknowledge that the LGBTQ plus community exists. And so, in fact, there are some places where kids can't actually have nicknames at school anymore because they might actually be somebody's name that aligns with a gender that wasn't assigned at birth. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. But that's like what we're sort of living with. Texas leads with 55 bills. I think Pennsylvania has 3, and those, I believe, were all introduced in the Senate, but I'm not sure. And then we can move on. We also have legislation, and this is past legislation, that affects discrimination based on housing. And in this one, so dark is good in this one, dark was bad in the last one, dark is good here. The darker the state, the more protections there are for queer people for housing, and the lighter the state, the fewer protections there are. And you can see that there are a lot of states that have fairly decent policies, and there are a lot of states that have really poor policies. It's notable that federal law now prohibits employment discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender minority status. We can switch again. And then there's also discrimination in healthcare, and this one hits pretty close to home for me, being a healthcare provider, right? And so on the left, you see the percentage of people, and this is from 2010, so it's a little bit old, but the percentage of people who are part of a survey of thousands of trans people who had experienced refusal to provide health care because of their gender identity or gender expression. This is not refusal to provide gender-affirming health care. It's not refusal to prescribe hormones or do surgery or anything. It's just to provide any health care at all. And you're looking at, about, what is it, a third of trans women and a quarter of trans men who somebody has refused to provide health care for them because of who they are. And then you look on the other side, on the right, and you look at people who are postponing care because of worry about the discrimination by healthcare providers. And you see that almost half of trans men had put off preventive care. So that's stuff like cancer screening, right? It's stuff like mammograms and breast exams and stuff like that, pap smears, those kind of things. So that's important stuff. Almost close to 50%. And so this is affecting people's health. And then we can go to the next slide. And you can see exactly how it's affecting people's health on this one. And this is, it's a little bit much, but on the left you have on the bottom, what the people who did this study are calling structural transphobia, which is basically just a measure of all those laws and policies that are targeting trans people, the stuff that I just talked about, basically. And on, up and down on the y-axis, you have a measure of psychological distress. And you can see that there's a very good correlation between the amount of structural transphobia, so the amount of stuff around that's targeting trans people, and basically their mental health, their psychological well-being. On the right, and so that was done in the States, and that's basically by state is how that's calculated. And on the right, it's done in Europe, and it's by country, and you have a similar scale on the bottom, and up and down you have on the top you have what is it? Sorry, I can't read it. It's some measure of life satisfaction, but I can't read exactly what it says. And on the bottom, you have concealment of identity. And so on the top, you can see that the more accepting a place is, the more life satisfaction people have, and the less accepting a place is, the less. And on the bottom, you can see that people conceal their identity more when there's more targeting them, which is not surprising, but these are actually the first 2 studies that actually really show this correlation. And then the next one. Okay, then we see light gray is cis people, or no, sorry, light gray is trans people, dark gray is cis people. You can see that basically on all of these measures, and these are all sort of behavioral health measures, notably things like suicidal ideation, suicide attempts, trans people are much more at risk of all of these things. There are a couple of things, actually, trans people may drink a little bit less, but that's not statistically significant. And they probably talk to their friends about their mental health about as much as cis people do, which is kind of weird. But so anyway, so on measures of health, we can see that all of this stuff, right, the non-equality of trans people actually really matters in everyday life and how people are allowed to live it. And then we can go on. And I was going to get back to the resilience part at some point, because this is the good news, right? We can actually do something to help with this. There are a number of factors that go into sort of moderating these risks. And the things that I would talk about here, that's the one on the bottom, community, right? Having a supportive community is really important. You move up the list and you have things like expression of affect. And I absolutely love the rainbow unicorn that says, we called off Pride, now it's Gay Wrath Month, because expression of affect, whether it's positive or negative, is actually really helpful for people, right? Getting it out, venting maybe, not too much venting, but a little bit of venting. And you know, you can see other things. So protest, that picture is from the protests after the murder of George Floyd. And then there's also in the upper right a postcard for the carnival in Provincetown, which is on Cape Cod in Massachusetts, which is a lot of fun, and it's just a lot of queer people being very queer. And so all of that matters, but communities like this one, who support their trans and other LGBTQ plus members, really important. Having a safe place to be, really important. I remember, I think when I first joined the board, one of the other board members asked me why it was important to me that, you know, the Hashkivenu, like why that was important, like having a safe shelter. This is why, right? So thank you very much for listening. I think I talked too much.
I'm going to need you to email me that gay wrath meme.
You got it. Any questions? No, I bored you all to death. Okay. Oh, yeah.
One of the things that concerns me, really. Anyhow, one of the things that concerns me, really, is the crazy exaggeration of all of this. Like, there's like 100 trans athletes in all of high school sports. 100. That was the out of millions and they act as if it's like the imminent danger destroying women. I mean, it's just over and over and over again, all this stuff. How do we get through to ordinary people? I'm not talking about the haters. I'm just talking about ordinary, non-informed people who actually have this image of a bunch of men going in and pretending they're women. One only knows why a bunch of men would want to do that, but okay. And they are going in and they are going to go in and rape girls in the bathroom. I think these people don't understand that women actually don't pee in the open. They have, well, I'm serious. This is, you know, the whole thing is so absurd, but how do we get through to ordinary people, this is to anybody up there, to understand, first of all, they are not endangered, even if they disagree with this. They are not in danger in any way from these people who are usually lovely, kind people who care about other people and don't want to bother them at all.
I mean, my first answer to that is ask them why they think Republican politicians suddenly care so much about women.
I would, oh, this is really loud. I'm going to look at this from a larger picture, which is not necessarily what you asked, but I think some of the stuff about sports is because education, post-secondary education in our country is a mortgage that you're going to take out for the next 20, 30 years, maybe the whole rest of your life. Like I know people who've decided not to have kids because their student loans are just too big. You know, like it's life-changing, the amount of money that you're going to pay for education. I see a lot of parents who truly believe their child is the next, like, you know, Tiger Woods or whatever their sport is, right? And I think some of that comes from the incredible, vicious competitiveness of sports because they think their kid's going to get a sports scholarship and then they won't have to pay for college. Like when I hear people talking about, I've seen people give speeches on the House floor. Like I've seen people talk about, my daughter plays soccer and I want her to get into a good school and that sort of thing. I hear it again and again. It's because they want free college, because they want their kids to be able to succeed in sports in many cases. And they're terrified that they're going to be disadvantaged and not get that free education. I question, and I don't have any data on this or anything, but I do question if we were to take that factor away, if we were to provide a free or free-ish affordable education post-secondary in our country, if there would be less viciousness because there would be no reason to be so bizarrely obsessed with children kicking a ball. I don't know.
Part of the motivation for having this conversation tonight is to bring this all into the open and to bring this to the fore and to say we're better than this. That as a community, at the high holidays, we take an accounting of who we've been and who we want to be. And so part of the response to all of that fear is to first acknowledge it and say there's all this fear out there, and then to come together and say there's nothing to fear here.
But I'm just not so optimistic because we're preaching to the choir in here. And, right, so, yeah, go ahead, you could give Ruth a microphone. But no, so wait, so we're having a great conversation here and there's no haters and there's no one who's gonna disagree and there's probably some of you who think we didn't go far enough. So I think I don't know how to get to the other people, Louise. I don't know how, so I don't feel particularly optimistic about that. Yeah, exactly. Like I was talking to someone the other day about this. I said, I feel like I totally live in this bubble. I appreciate the bubble I live in. I mean, I appreciate that I live in a bubble. Not that I appreciate the bubble. I appreciate that I live in a bubble. I understand that. I hardly ever talk to people who disagree with me. So how are we going to get I don't have the answer.
A question for Morgan. Your survey data, you said was from 2010.
Yeah.
Is there any more recent data, or do you have anecdotal?
There will be soon.
Okay. Do you have a sense of whether it's as bad or worse or better?
I mean, I can give you my gut feeling, which is based in hope and maybe not a whole lot else. I think it'll be better. The equivalent survey was done again in 2020, and I haven't seen any data from it yet, but I'm hoping it will be better.
Hi. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, thanks. I apologize because I got here late. You may already have discussed this issue. One question I have is it not correct that a transgender woman would have greater physical assets for some sports based on having been born a male with sexual traits such as certain muscles, etc., and hormones. So is that not a legitimate issue?
It's a good question, and it's a question we actually don't really know the answer to completely. Most of the governing bodies for sports require 2 years of both androgen blockers, so testosterone suppression, plus estrogen, in order for trans women to compete as women. And the data are not clear, because you can think of a lot of things other than hormones that might contribute to somebody's success in a particular sport. And so we don't know, but what we do know is that honestly it's not obvious. It's not, you know, people sort of think, oh yeah, you know, you have, you know, there must be some muscles still there, or, you know, your frame is built differently. There seems to be a whole lot of variation among women and among men, and that variation may be, and my guess is probably is enough to account for, basically to erase those differences. You know, that you can have somebody who was assigned female at birth and has, you know, identifies as female, who actually has very similar characteristics to somebody who was assigned male at birth and has undergone hormonal transition, and that you're not actually going to see a whole lot of difference there, just because there's a huge range. And, you know, completely aside from people who were assigned female at birth, identify as women, but whose biology is intersex, so who have a mix of traits and may have naturally more androgens. And so that's a whole other thing. And you end up with a lot of these arguments with people wanting to physically examine people in order for them to participate in sports. I mean, there are bills around the country that are being introduced, not that have passed as far as I'm aware, that want children's genitals examined for them to be able to participate in sports. And so I think there's a whole lot going on here other than, what is this advantage?
And
blurt out, but I just can't let that thread. A 6'4" woman who's born a woman has an advantage over a 5'3" woman who also wants to play basketball. Nobody says that's unfair.
I'm almost 6 feet tall. People my whole life have asked me if I can play basketball. Sadly, I have no hand-eye coordination and I can't run. But yeah.
Michael Phelps is well known to have these enormous arms that enable him to win every swimming championship. Nobody says that's unfair. He should have to cut back his arms a little bit.
Part of the problem, just to add on to this from sort of a legislative perspective too. Oh yeah, yeah.
Michael Phelps should have to cut back his arms to be more fair.
It's okay. Okay, sorry. So as an aside, to follow up sort of on the male versus female in sports question too, then you start to get into questions like, you know, we were talking about the Talmud passages talking about people's physical appearance upon examination, right? So, and you were talking just now about examining people. There's a runner, and I believe her name is Caster Semenya. I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly or not, but there was some discussion because they said, and a lot of this is offensive language, so I apologize, but basically saying that she looked mannish, she looked masculine. She had maybe a stronger jaw or looked more athletic, and frankly, some of it can get a little bit racist because people tend to assign more masculine traits to Black female athletes than they do to white female athletes. So white women are perceived to be more feminine than Black women. And so there are issues because you look at someone and are you just looking at their outer physical appearance? Because then if you start to examine, you know, you take an MRI and what does their internal anatomy look like? And then you start looking at how much testosterone or estrogen is in someone, and that can vary greatly just across the population. So there does become a question of where do you draw the line? And I think right now people are trying to figure out where that line is. I think that, as you mentioned, you know, there are not so many people that this really impacts that, but from what I see as a legislator, it is derailing our entire policy approach to doing things in this state. So for instance, in education. Our school system in Pennsylvania was ruled unconstitutional. I don't know if everybody knows that, but in the past year it was ruled unconstitutional. We are not providing a thorough education to children in a way that complies with our constitutional obligations to children across the Commonwealth. So if we don't fix that legislatively, the courts will fix it for us, and it might not be in a way that we want to happen. But instead of having conversations about are our children getting what they need in terms of science and technology, engineering, math, these types of questions, are they getting an arts education? Are they doing this? Are they doing that? Are they prepared for college if that's what they choose to do, or a trade, or start a business? We're having conversations about what bathrooms they have access to in their schools, and whether or not certain books should be pulled out. We had a particularly vicious argument on the House floor before we took our recess about whether or not we can have kindness classes in school, because we might be manipulating children as to who they're daring to be kind to based on what kind of a person's identity they're looking at. So from my perspective, we are being led down this rabbit hole, down this sort of never-ending path, and it's a distraction, and it's important, but it's also a distraction from huge issues like our education system in the whole entire state is unconstitutional, and we're supposed to be working on it and making sure the kids know how to read and add and that they're prepared to have a career. But people whose fundraising efforts politically benefit from getting people angry about the fact that one girl might be allowed to play on the quote-unquote wrong sports team in a high school is more important than if everybody else in that school can read. So to me, I think we really need to stop letting people make us angry and fight with each other, and instead focus on how can we help people, how can we make sure people do get treated right and do have the opportunities that they are legally allowed to have, how can we make sure that we're taking care of kids and preparing them for the future, and not allowing politicians to make us angry with each other and distract us because it puts enormous amounts of money in their re-election campaign budgets.
Oh, sorry. This gentleman has been waiting for a while.
So this one's more for the rabbis, but the discussion focused sort of on the Jewish framework for looking at someone who's non-binary or transgender. But is there another way to kind of perhaps to attack like the more immediate threat of problematic legislation, which, in my opinion, is driven basically by animus more than anything else, and looking at that through a lens of traditional Jewish values like compassion and, protecting the vulnerable, those sorts of things, and how can, as a community and as a Jewish community, how can we like look towards those values if we can't even talk about the larger kind of more normative issues of how we think about the LGBTQ plus community, but like really looking at the obstacles that they and their families are facing in the immediate term.
For me, this is precisely why I wanted to have this conversation at this time of year. This is not sort of the stereotypical slichot beginning high holiday kind of conversation. But I think we're living in a world where we need to do that. Where there is so much animus, where there is so much difficulty just between humans and how we interact with each other, that we've got to come back and start with our basic humanity, and start with God creating man and woman both. And whether some of us have more of one or more of the other, or have both of this in us, doesn't matter. We're still created by the same God. And if we can start the new year with that kind of shared understanding, then maybe, just maybe, we can begin to shift in the new year into a better way of behaving. I say that knowing perfectly well that in about 2 weeks when we celebrate Rosh Hashanah, we're going to have a few more people in this room, and I wish more were here tonight. But I also know that by starting this conversation tonight and having this, we're laying down a card and saying this is vital. and we're making a statement that says, and we're doing this collectively. This is, I mean, it's also important that we're doing this jointly. That we're saying as a Jewish community, these are our core values, and we're going to take them seriously. And we're going to listen to the politicians, and we're going to listen to the scientists, and we're going to do the right thing, which is what our tradition pushes us to do. So for me, that's what you described is precisely why I was motivated to do this, because I want to elevate this conversation, and I want to bring it to a higher plane of holiness than our society has allowed it to be.
I would just add that there's probably never anyone who's ever listened to me more than twice who hasn't heard me say things like compassion and kindness and understanding, and that's just like the same thing, one sermon. But I think it goes beyond that. I think it's the other step is we're all convinced. How do we get motivated to have a conversation with someone who's not in our bubble, who to actually maybe go and speak to a legislator? How do we do the next step? Like, how do we understand that it's our responsibility? It's not like, yeah, so we understand it and we're woke and all that, but then like, what's the next step, right? Like, what are we gonna do? And I think that is an important add-on for me. Like, yes, we can agree that we're all created in God's image, and we can agree that there's no peace without justice. We can all agree on those things. But what are we going to actually do to make it, to bring it into the world, into outside of our bubble? I would just say like we. All the time, the Religious Action Center says, come to Harrisburg and lobby your legislators, and I can honestly tell you that I can't get anyone to do anything like that, but you can, and maybe together we can do that. Yes, go
It
ahead.
happens that my representative is Dan Frankel, and Dan's already there.
Yeah, that is.
And your representative is Abigail, and she's already there. We're both lucky.
I was just going to say that is the problem. I have people from my district who will charter a bus, take that bus all the way to Harrisburg, and come to my office and scream at me to vote for something I was already a co-sponsor of. You don't need to do any of that. It's just kind of a waste of money. Spend the money on like the food pantry or something. But if you have relatives who live in districts that have representatives or senators who disagree with you on these issues, have them contact their reps and their senators, because otherwise you're just preaching to the choir. Like, we're already supporting you. Don't waste money on chartering a bus. Sorry if anybody owns a chartered bus company.
All right, we've got time for one last question.
Does what help?
Does lobbying people who are not already of your point of view actually move the needle?
So does lobbying people help? Let me give you the community organizer answer and then the cynical, I've been in office for 6 months answer. Okay. So the community organizer answer is, every voice makes a difference. The I've been in office for 6 months and the scales have fallen from my eyes answer is, did you make a campaign contribution? Because, I mean, real talk, like when we have conversations about charter schools, there's a reason why half of the legislature votes for funding them more, and half of us vote against that because some of us take money from the public school teacher unions, and some people take money from the charter school executives. So.
Ruth, did you have a comment?
We're talking about the fact that there were not very many people here tonight. And we were also talking about the emphasis about people who object to rights for people who have different genders, with particular reference to sports. So I think the best way to advertise a program like this in the future is to say that we're going to talk about sports and talk about the and word it in some way. You have to understand, I don't like discussion of sports. My son and I argue this all the time. I have no interest in sports whatsoever. But I think you might get more people to come if you were sports oriented.
Thank you all for being here. Join us for Oneg in the auditorium, and then we'll be back in here for the Slichot service in give or take a half an hour or so. Thank you all for being here.
I really compete in equestrian sports, and there's no men's and women's. It's just,
Oh, really?
it's just one thing. Yeah.
Cantor Reinwald to the bima. Where is he? What? I d- just whenever you're ready, Cantor.
I'm ready. One more time. Page 99 in your prayer book. ליהודים הייתה אורה ושמחה וששון בעיקר. ליהודים הייתה אורה ושמחה וששון בעיקר. כן
טהורה, בשמחה וששון בעיקר. ליהודים הייתה אורה, הייתה אורה, בשמחה וששון בעיקר. כן תהיה לנו, תהיה לנו, תהיה לנו, כן תהיה לנו, תהיה לנו, תהיה לנו. ליהודים הייתה אורה, הייתה אורה, בשמחה וששון בעיקר.
We'll dim our light slightly as we move into Havdalah.
Page 100. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei beri hagafen, borei beri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei minei v'samim, borei minei v'samim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei meorei ha'esh, borei meorei ha'esh. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, המבדיל בין קודש לחול.
המבדיל בין קודש לחול. המבדיל בין קודש לחול, חטאותינו הוא ימחול, זרענו וכספנו ירבה כחול, וככוכבים בלילה. שבוע טוב, 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 שבוע טוב. A good week, a week of peace. May gladness reign and joy increase.
Mashiach ben David, im Mashiach ben David, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hagiladi, Miriam Haneviyah, Oz v'zimra be'ada,
Page 103.
Miriam tirkod itanu, lehagdil zimrat olam, Miriam tirkod itanu, lehagdil zimrat olam, imhera ve'yamenu, itivienu, el mei ha-Yeshua, el mei ha-Yeshua, Miriam ha-Neviah, Oz v'zimra be'ada, Miriam tirkod itanu, lehagdil zimrat olam.
You'll find the
Onios.
words on your song sheet that you hopefully picked up when you came in here. Only song that will be on there for tonight.
Eli Eliyahu, Eli Eliyahu, Eli Eliyahu, Hanavi Havena, Bo Yetomrich Bo Nabishvaeki, Lo Shachav li Bo Gam Lo Ra'ashena. Eli Eliyahu, Eli Eliyahu, Eli Eliyahu, Hanavi Havena, Bo Yetamrich Bo Nabashviki, Lo Shachav li Bo Gam Lo Ra'ashena. Eliyahu, Eli Eliyahu, Eli Eliyahu, Eli Eliyahu, Hanavi Havena, Bo Yetamrich Bo Nabashviki, Lo Shachav li Bo Gam Lo Ra'ashena. Eli Eliyahu, Eli Eliyahu, Eli Eliyahu, Hanavi Havena.
We can bring the lights back up as we turn to page 104.
We begin the Slichot service, entering into Slichot with Hashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuva. Return us, take us back, God. Let us come back, renew us as you have in the days before.
Hashivenu, Hashivenu, Adonai Elecha,
Hashivenu, Adonai
On the top of 105, we continue together. Last sliver of the moon, the waning crescent, small and slender, glowing in the east at the end of the journey. A curve of silver barely there that fades away with the dawn. Faintest light the eye can discern, like the soul within me barely there, waning and weary as the year winds down. At the end of the journey, the old moon flickers out and darkness awaits the new. Now in the stillness we can feel it being born. Remind us, the horizon will be bright again. The waxing crescent will rise. heal our hearts, gather us in from the darkness, restore the light within us.
Or zaru ala tzadik. Or zaru ala tzadik. Uleyishrei lev, uleyishrei lev, uleyishrei lev simcha. Or zaru ala tzadik. Or zaru ala tzadik. Uleyishrei lev, uleyishrei lev, uleyishrei lev simcha. Or zaru ala tzadik. Or zaru ala tzadik. Uleyishrei lev, uleyishrei lev, uleyishrei lev simcha. Or zaru ala tzadik. Or zaru ala tzadik. Uleyishrei lev, uleyishrei lev, uleyishrei lev simcha. Or zaru ala tzadik. Or zaru ala tzadik. Uleyishrei lev, uleyishrei lev, uleyishrei lev simcha. Or zaru ala tzadik. Or zaru ala tzadik. Uleyishrei lev, uleyishrei lev, uleyishrei lev simcha.
On 106, we continue together. The psalmist sang, "At midnight I rise to give thanks and praise." And so we come to this hour of slichot under the canopy of night to celebrate goodness, to proclaim what is right and true, to praise, to thank, to bless the great giver who gives and renews our lives. We turn to loved ones, to friends, and our people everywhere, the whole house of Israel. And our hearts turn toward the human family. We pray for its healing. Yet hardest of all is the inward gaze, the return to ourself, the honest reckoning of the soul, cheshbon hanefesh. We ask how to account for selfish acts, lies, and senseless anger, how to account for the shadows, the storms, the bitterness in our lives, the damage and distress we cause, how to own up to it all, and find our way back with integrity, in peace. We ask, have we the will to change? And if not now, when?
Pitchu li sharei tzedek avovam odea. 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 Pitchu li שערי צדק אבובם אודיה. פיתחו לי שערי צדק אבובם אודיה.
We take a few moments now for personal reflection.
Page 111.
שומר ישראל, שמור שארית ישראל, ואל יאבד ישראל, האומרים שמע ישראל. שומר ישראל, שמור שארית ישראל, ואל יאבד ישראל, האומרים שמע ישראל. שומר גוי אחד, שמור שארית עם אחד, ואל יאבד גוי אחד, עם יחד עם שמך, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד. שומר גוי אחד, שמור שארית עם אחד, ואל יאבד גוי אחד, עם יחד עם שמך, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד. שומר גוי קדוש, שמור שארית עם קדוש, ואל יאבד גוי קדוש עם ששים בשלוש, קדושת לקדוש. שומר גוי קדוש, שמור שארית עם קדוש, ואל יאבד גוי קדוש עם ששים בשלוש, קדושות לקדוש. נתרצה ברחמים, ומתפייס בתחנונים, יתרצה ויתפייס לדור עני, כי אין עוזר. מתרצה ברחמים, ומתפייס בתחנונים, יתרצה ויתפייס לדור עני, כי אין עוזר. שומר ישראל, שמור שארית ישראל, ואל יאבד ישראל, האומרים שמע ישראל. שומר ישראל, שמור שארית ישראל, ואל יאבד ישראל, האומרים שמע ישראל.
Turn the page, entering into the section, the promise of forgiveness. On page 113, we are taught days are scrolls. Write on them only what you want remembered. But we remember our weakness, and our days bear the mark of all that went wrong. On this night we have hope in the one who sustains us. We read together, though we stumble and falter, you promise forgiveness. If we stray from the truth, you do not forsake us. If we sink to the depths, your mercy uplifts us. If our urges betray us, your compassion is endless. If we distance ourselves, you do not disdain us. If we abandon your teaching, still you embrace us. If we seek you sincerely, your presence surrounds us. If we pray from the heart, you listen with yours. Though we stumble and falter, we are blessed by your promise.
We continue with the words of Ki Anu Amecha, page 117. Ki Anu Amecha, Ve'ata Eloheinu, Anu Vanecha, Ve'ata Avinu. Feel free to join in. Anu Avadecha, Ve'ata Adonenu, Anu Kehalecha, Ve'ata Chelkeinu. Anu Nachalatecha, Ve'ata Goraleinu. Anu Tzonecha, Ve'ata Roenu. Anu Charmecha, Ve'ata Notreinu. Anu Feulatecha, Ve'ata Yotzreinu. Anu Rayatecha, Ve'ata Dodeinu. Anu Segulatecha, Ve'ata Kirovenu. Anu Amecha, Ve'ata Malkeinu. Anu Ma'amirecha, Ve'ata Ma'amirenu.
On page 119. Notice the river at break of dawn, a braid of streams, creeks, and brooks, a dance of insects near the shore. Notice how brackish where the river meets the sea, how with grace the river hugs the shore, fierce in its rising, fiercer when it falls. Notice it all, how it bends, how it tells the time of year, and how smooth the boulders are that guide its course. Notice the Holy One in blessing and in beauty, in acts of repair, in the unearthing of truth, in eyes that meet, in the tumult of change, in words of forgiveness, in the bridges we build to those we hurt, in the flow of a year, in the course of a journey, in rising and falling, in the bend of a river, in the hand we hold out to those who hurt us, in the life we are living, in blessing and in beauty.
We invite everyone to rise now as we open the ark and begin the process of changing the mantles from the everyday to the holy.
Adonai, Adonai, Erachom v'chanun, Erech apayim v'rav chesed v'emet, Notzer chesed le'alafim, Noseh avon v'fesha, v'chata v'nakeh. Adonai, Adonai, Erachum v'chanun, Adonai, 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 Erachum v'chanun, Adonai, Erech apayim v'rav v'emet, Adonai, Noseh chesed la'alafim, Noseh avon v'fesha, v'chata v'nakeh. Adonai, Adonai, Erachum v'chanun, Adonai, 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 Erachum v'chanun, Adonai.
עוון ופשע וחטאה ונקה. אדוני, אדוני, רחום וחנון, אדוני, 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 רחום וחנון, אדוני. ערך המים ורחפת, אדוני, נושא חסד לאלפים, נושא עוון ופשע וחטאה ונקה. אדוני, אדוני, רחום וחנון, אדוני, 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 רחום וחנון, אדוני. השיבנו, השיבנו, אדוני אליך, ונשובה, ונשובה, חדש, חדש ימינו כקדם.
Yeah, once we close out. We continue on page 124.
How many clergy does it take to change a Torah scroll?
Yahanaim Saham Ekom Hanade נעלם, ואנה לא אמצאך, כבודך מלא עולם. דרשתי קרבתך, בכל ליבי קראתיך, ורציתי לקראתך, לקראתי מצאתיך. יאי 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 דרשתי קרבתך, בכל ליבי קראתיך, ורציתי לקראתך, לקראתי מצאתיך. ואנה לא אמצאך, כבודך מלא עולם.
We turn to page 127 and begin the process of vidui, of confession. As the days of awe near, we reach for the infinite. Mindful of our frailty, we seek the holy. Despite our mortality, we carry within us the Ancient of Days. Despite loneliness within, we sense that we belong to a single soul, a spirit that fills the entire universe. Let us find in that universal spirit a new source of strength and significance, more compassion, more generosity, more gratitude for life. Let our hearts be open to self-reckoning, and may we grasp how vital to our lives is teshuvah, the path of return. On this night of forgiveness, we confess our wrongs and take account of sins, failures of judgment, weakness of will. The hour is late, our need to be forgiven profound. Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu, tavo lefanecha tefilatenu. Our God and God of all generations, may our prayers reach your presence. And when we turn to you, do not be indifferent. Adonai, we are arrogant and stubborn, claiming to be blameless and free of sin. In truth, we have stumbled and strayed. We have done wrong. Together we confess. Together we take responsibility.
We rise as we join in this confession of Ashamnu, page 128. Ashamnu, Ashamnu, Bagadnu, Bagadnu, Gazalnu, Gazalnu, Dibarnu Dofi, Dibarnu Dofi, He'evinu, He'evinu, Vehirshanu, Vehirshanu, Zadnu, Zadnu, Hamasnu, Hamasnu, Tafalnu Sheker, Tafalnu Sheker, Yatsnura, Yatsnura, Kizavnu, Kizavnu, Latsnu, Latsnu, Maradnu, Maradnu, Niyatsnu, Niyatsnu, Sararnu, Sararnu, Avinu, Avinu, Pashanu, Pashanu, Sararnu, Sararnu, Kishinu Oref, Kishinu Oref,
Rashanu,
Rashanu,
Shichatnu,
Shichatnu,
Tiavnu,
Tiavnu,
Tainu,
Tainu,
Titanu,
Titanu.
We continue in English together. We abused and abandoned. We acted without thinking. We blamed others when we failed. We boasted and belittled. We coveted and corrupted. We coerced the weak to do our will. We drove away those we loved with silence. We deceived and denied. We enticed and enslaved. We exalted money and material goods. We fouled air, sea, and land. We flattered and falsified. We gravitated to those who gossip. We gave up our ideals and gave in to our impulses. We hated and humiliated. We held grudges and refused to forgive. We ignored and idolized. We insisted that we were right. We judged others rashly and wrongly. We were jealous and unjust. We killed. We were knowingly unkind. We kept to ourselves in the face of need. We lacked commitment to causes we espoused. We were lazy and we lied. We missed the mark and minimized our mistakes. We mocked what we did not understand. We neglected those who depend on us. We were negative and narcissistic. We overreached and overreacted, too often erupting in outbursts of anger. We poisoned and polluted. We perverted truth for personal gain. We quelled the voice of conscience within us. We quit too soon and quarreled too often. We ridiculed and resented. We refused to accept help. We rationalized our failings and our flaws. We spurned the wisdom of our tradition. We squabbled and scorned. We talked too much or not enough. We traumatized our children with anger. We issued ultimatums and made ugly threats. We uttered untruths and undermined with cynicism. We were vain and vicious. We vilified foreigners and strangers. We wasted time, strength, and talent. We wallowed in self-pity, wished but did not act. We exploited and expropriated. We expected others to save the world. We earned too much for prizes and praise, and failed to share fully in the joy of Zion reborn.
Al chet shechatanu lefanecha ba'ones v'ratzon. The ways we have wronged you under duress and by choice.
The
harm we have caused in your world deliberately and by mistake. Al chet shechatanu lefanecha begalui v'sater.
The ways we have wronged you openly and secretly.
The harm we have caused in your world consciously and unconsciously. Al chet shechatanu lefanecha b'sinat chinam.
The ways we have wronged you by hating without cause.
The harm we have caused in your world through gossip and rumor. Al chet shechatanu lefanecha b'tzarut ayin.
The ways we have wronged you through a selfish or petty spirit.
The harm we have caused in your world by hardening our hearts. Ve'al kulam Eloha slichot, salach lanu, machal lanu, kaper lanu. For all these failures of judgment and will, God of forgiveness, forgive us, pardon us, lead us to atonement.
Ve'al kulam Eloha slichot, selach lanu mechal lanu kaper lanu. Ve'al kulam Eloha slichot, selach lanu mechal lanu, selach lanu mechal lanu kaper lanu.
Page 141, I'm sorry, page 135. We continue with Shema Kolenu.
תפילתנו, כי אל שומע תפילות בתחת אונים אתה.
We turn ahead now to 141 as we prepare to conclude. We turn to the words of Avinu Malkeinu. Avinu Malkeinu Shema Kolenu. Avinu Malkeinu, Almighty and merciful, hear our voice.
Avinu Malkeinu chatanu lefanecha. Avinu Malkeinu, we have strayed and sinned before you.
Avinu Malkeinu chamol aleinu v'yalol aleinu v'tzapenu. Avinu Malkeinu, have compassion on us and on our families.
Avinu Malkeinu kalei deva v'cher v'ra'av me'aleinu. Avinu Malkeinu, halt the onslaught of sickness, violence, and hunger.
Avinu Malkeinu kalei kol tsar u'mastin me'aleinu.
Avinu
Malkeinu, halt the reign of those who cause pain and terror.
Avinu Malkeinu kotvenu b'sefer chayim tovim. Avinu Malkeinu, enter our names in the book of lives well lived.
Avinu Malkeinu chadesh aleinu shana tova u'metuka. Avinu Malkeinu, renew for us a year of goodness.
Avinu Malkeinu, Onenu Vaneinu. Avinu Malkeinu, Onenu Vaneinu, Ki en banu ma'asim. Aseh imanu et tzedaka v'chesed. Aseh imanu tzedaka v'chesed v'hoshienu. Avinu Malkeinu, Onenu Vaneinu. Avinu Malkeinu, Onenu Vaneinu, Ki en banu ma'asim. Aseh imanu et tzedaka v'chesed. Aseh imanu tzedaka v'chesed v'hoshienu. Avinu Malkeinu, Onenu Vaneinu. Avinu Malkeinu, Onenu Vaneinu, Ki en banu ma'asim.
We are going to conclude with a couple of sounds of the shofar. But before we do that, I'd like to express our gratitude to our cantors, to Cantor Toby Glaser and Cantor David Reinwald for putting the service together. And it has been our pleasure to work together as always and to be part of this community as we begin this really sort of in-depth work towards going towards the new year with intention and focus and joy too. All right, Tekiah. Tekiah. Tekiah Gedolah. Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova. What do you say? Yasher koach. Oh, sorry.